Boker Tov, everyone. Greetings, Chavarim. Welcome, my friends. We're delighted to be able to come together again for a taste of Torah. Now, we are still in the book of Leviticus, and we are going to be talking about the Torah portion known as Emor. This follows immediately on Kedoshim, and as I've been reminding people, the Reform calendar puts us 1 week ahead of what is being studied in the traditional calendar used by conservative and Orthodox Jews in the diaspora. We are in sync with the Torah portions being read in Israel, while they continue to observe the special diaspora calendar that's been around for 1800 years, even though we know the exact dates of holidays and things like that. Okay, I'm not going to get too snarky about that because I might get a little snarky later. Anyway, of course, it's also Sifrat HaOmer, the counting of the Omer, and today is the 19th day of counting the Omer. So if you get a chance, you can say the bracha. Just look it up on the internet, and you will find the bracha and the blessing you're supposed to say for the 19th day. So, Emor. Leviticus, of course, the book that is at the very center of the Torah, is called Leviticus because the Greek readers noticed that the priesthood and the tribe of Levi, or Levi, sorry, serve as the centerpiece of most of what is discussed in this particular book. In Hebrew, we call it Vayikra, from the first word that appears, and then he called, that is, then God called to Moses. But in any case, Leviticus is not a bad choice of a name because there is a lot of stuff going on with the priesthood, and that's certainly true with Emor. Now, my object lesson today is the menorah. This is not a Chanukiah, this is a menorah. Notice that it is 7 cups, 7 lamps rather than 9 lamps. And it's the original Hanukkah because this is the model on which the Hanukkah you have at home is probably built. This was stood in the temple. It's described in our Torah portion. It's mentioned how the priests are supposed to kindle this on a regular basis, creating a ner tamid, a regular or continuous light. We, of course, have a ner tamid in our synagogue sanctuary. They're not quite the same thing, and it isn't necessarily that this never went out. It's just that it was perpetually maintained so that it burned most of the time. So a shift in consciousness, a shift in interpretation, and that's actually part of what we're going to be talking about today. So, there are 2 sections really to Emor. The first one is focusing specifically on the person of the priest and who may serve in the sanctuary and some of the peripheral rules around that. And then the second part is about the holidays, because the priesthood was big on the holidays. And normally I would focus on the holiday part because I really, really believe that becoming familiar with the Hebrew calendar and its celebrations is about as good as it gets for developing one's own Jewish theology. We learn our sacred history, but we also learn our sacred values from the calendar. So I would be emphasizing the calendar. But in this particular case, I think I want to talk about the institution of the priesthood. So I think we all have a vague notion about what the ancient priesthood was like. And we also are conscious that there has been a significant shift, development, I would say progress, in the development of Judaism since the time that the Torah was originally written. Originally, we were a hierarchical society. There were really 3 layers of, 3 different kinds of Israelites, each with different obligations. There was the Stam Israelite, ordinary Israelite. There was the Leviim. That's the tribe of Levi, who have special prerogatives and obligations around the temple and worship. And within the Leviim, there are the kahuna, the priesthood. And the priesthood are the sacred peak of ancient Jewish caste or class. And of course, now the priesthood no longer exists. We have operated for 2,000 years more or less as a meritocracy, and we no longer have priests. We have lay religious leaders. We call them rabbis. And so that has undergone a radical change. So let's go back and take a deep dive into the priesthood, this hierarchical system that makes us slightly uncomfortable, and maybe I'm going to make you a little bit more uncomfortable. So, in our Torah portion, a number of criteria around the priesthood are spelled out. The first of them that's quite startling, well, there are a couple of odd ones, like haircuts. I know we often debate the appropriateness of a haircut here or there, but in our Torah portion, priests are supposed to have properly cropped hair, and it's really, really important. But that's just one of a number of cosmetic issues that comes up. The priest is supposed to be, for lack of an ancient term, something more in a modern venue, photogenic. The priest who serves in the temple has to meet certain physical criteria. He can't have a short leg, he can't be a dwarf, he can't be hunchbacked, he can't be physically marred in any way. I guess the priesthood is, at least superficially, is meant to mirror the perfection of God in some sense. You want the best possible example of the image of God, making offerings to God. So, basically the template for a priest is Brad Pitt. That sits uncomfortably with us today. We are much more conscious of the idea that superficialities are not as important as we might think. It is a natural human impulse to be focused on superficialities, but we realize that there's much more going on here. Of course, the unstated fact is that the only person among the priestly clan that can be a priest is a man. There are no women priests. Maybe in pre-Israelite practice, when we were just developing, there might have been priestesses. The argument has been made. I'm not sure I've seen good proof of that, but in any case, the system we have now is exclusively concentrated on the men. Now, it turns out it's not just about cosmetics. There's also a set of behaviors that are supposed to be honored in order for a priest, in order to be able to function in the temple, chief of which is that the priest has to make certain sexual relational decisions. A priest, for example, is not permitted to marry a zona. What's a zona? It's a harlot. That's how it's always translated into English. What exactly is a harlot is up for debate and has been for the last 2,000 years. The rabbis sometimes can define it rather limited to the form of a prostitute, someone who has worked for money and for sexual favors. Other times they just understand it in a more general sense of a promiscuous woman. So the kind of women priests associate with reflect on their status, and that's ongoing issue. We are also told it goes further than that. A priest should not marry a divorced woman. So if it makes you think to the moment, oh, the priesthood is rather like being a monarch in England, where until very recently, the idea that a future king or a king of England could be married to a divorcee was simply unacceptable. So you can see that this kind of idea continues to intrude into the modern era. that the choice of a wife reflects on the priest, and we want them to uh, be sexually pure, however you want to define that. But then it goes on even further. Women reflecting on men continues to be an issue when we are presented with the rather startling statement. Let's see if I can zero in on it. Oh, here it is, 21:9. Um, when the daughter of a priest defiles herself through harlotry, and again, we do not have a good working definition of what harlotry is, and since the priesthood has not been functional for 2,000 years, there's been no requirement to come up with a proper, narrow determination of what that means. But when the daughter of a priest defiles herself through harlotry, it is her father whom she defiles. It's not enough that she defiles herself, but she brings shame upon her father. She shall be put to the fire. Yeah, yeah. If you recoil a little bit at that thought, that is exactly right. For the honor of a man, a daughter may be executed, killed, um, slaughtered in order to protect the honor of a man. Uh, this should not surprise us so much. The history of women's legal status, up until very recently, has not been that of an equal with a man. And in fact, in many, many areas of traditional law, not just Jewish law, but if we were to go over to English law, American law, common law, the fact of the matter is that women have been subject to men in many different ways. Historically, until very recently, uh, women, especially in the orbit of a man, that is to say, someone who is married or is a minor with a father, have very truncated rights, or had very truncated rights. They really weren't considered fully autonomous and were subject to the authority of their husband or father. And there are still remnants of that in our culture. We've become aware, just like we have about the hierarchy of ancient Israel and about the priesthood, that in fact there's something fundamentally unfair about this. I won't even use the word unequal. That's a concept that we've developed over the Enlightenment. But just in our gut, we are aware that the status of women is unfair, that they are subject to restrictions, prosecutions, um, all kinds of things that men are not subject to. And often it is the case that women are subject to the preferences, the needs, the obligations, the honor, the pride of men. And I would like to say that this is something that has been weeded out of Judaism, just as I would like to say this is something that has been weeded out of American legal and moral culture. But of course, we all know that's not the case. That in fact, women are not treated as completely autonomous in Jewish law. And we are reminded that even today, women are not treated as completely autonomous in American law. And so I bring this as a negative example, not something that has something to teach us on a positive level from the Torah, but something that reminds us that we are generally pretty happy that we're not, we have developed beyond what was originally the case 3,000 years ago in some areas of law and life. And so I continue to strive for the cause of women's equality in all spheres, and I hope you feel the same sentiment. And this is something we need to be conscious of. Why should a woman be suffering for the honor of what men think they have to do, for the restrictions that men think are absolutely essential for the moral well-being of society. I'm going to leave it there and just remind you that in 4 weeks I'm beginning my sabbatical. So these times of Torah that we've spent together will come to a temporary end. But I hope I've addicted you to the idea that you can go online and find all kinds of wonderful Jewish stuff. We Jews are very well represented on the internet, and there's fantastic materials waiting for you if you just decide to do a little browsing around. So, Shavua Tov, a good week, and Shalom Haverim. Take care, my friends, and we'll talk to you next week.